The whole purpose of the approach we're taking at the moment, which is to say to those people who engage in this criminal activity on our street that they will be held accountable, is to deter them, to deter them and others from doing this anymore.
It's not working, is it? Because we had a situation where there was a meeting with the police chiefs. We then had the press conference, and since then we've had riots and disorder in 9 cities up and down the country. Respectfully, I completely see where you're coming from, but it's not working, is it?
Well, can I just say, this has all happened in the last few days. So we need to now take stock over the next day or so. We need to see what happens today. We will, of course, be meeting on Monday. We will need to see what the picture is, what the intelligence picture is. We need to look at the actual information available to make decisions about how we best then proceed. But at the moment, our focus is on dealing with these criminals, arresting them, getting them into court, into remand if necessary, but dealing with them first and foremost.
Minister, 4 weeks in, have you lost control of the country?
No, look, we've had a really tragic week, starting with that awful incident in Southport on Monday. We've had some public order disorder this week, and that's clearly causing lots of concern around the country. Can I just also say, I think the police who've had to deal with what happened in Southport on Monday and then deal with this public disorder during the rest of the week have done a remarkable job, and I want to pay tribute to those officers. And I also want to say that a number of them have been injured in the course of the week, and our thoughts should be really with those officers doing their job, keeping our communities safe, and have found themselves injured.
Is it time? What's the government going to do? I mean, in terms of, obviously the police are there, but we've got a plan with the court sitting through the night. How is the government going to actually now deal with what is happening?
So on Thursday, the Prime Minister called chief constables together to talk about whether they had all the resources that they needed to be able to deal with this criminality on our streets. They reassured the Prime Minister that they did. They've had mutual aid plans in place for many years, so they can move officers around if needs be. There are, of course, the criminal justice system, and we want to make sure that if people carry out this disorder on our streets, they are brought to account quickly, they are arrested, they are taken through the court. And if that means that the courts need to sit longer, that will happen. The Lord Chancellor is in conversations with the Judiciary about that. And if they need to go into prison, that there are places available. And again, the Lord Chancellor has confirmed that is the case. Those places are available. So what we want to make sure is that people understand if they engage in this criminal activity on our streets, the looting that happened in my constituency last night in the city centre, they will be found, they will be arrested, they will be brought before the court, and there are consequences for their actions. That's the message that we wanted to send out this weekend.
Would you support the courts and judges in the courts taking the same sort of stance that was taken towards those Just Stop Oil protesters when they were handed jail terms of 4 or 5 years for blocking the M25, that actually they impose such significant sentences that they act as a deterrent in themselves for anybody else who might find this behaviour is somehow acceptable?
Well, obviously we have the laws that are set out in terms of the
10 years,
guidance on sentencing. It is, but can I just say that obviously Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, was the DPP in 2011 when we had similar public disorder issues in the country, and at that stage then a number of measures were put into place to ensure that there was speedy, efficient, quick justice to deter people from carrying on acting in this way. Now he's the Prime Minister now, so he knows that whole range of things that can be done to ensure that people understand that there are consequences to people's actions and that the state will act. So people need to be aware, if they were looting in those shops in Hull last night, there will be a knock on their door, they will be brought before the police and the courts, and there will be consequences.
You said a speedy action. What I'm talking about is severe action. I'm talking about people going to prison for significant amounts of time. Is that a possibility now, and is that something you'd like to see?
Well, that's obviously a matter for the Judiciary, and they work within the framework of the sentencing guidelines.
Just
but
personally,
clearly,
as a minister,
I want people punished. Yes, I want people punished for causing the mayhem and disruption to our communities. I am absolutely appalled about what happened in my city yesterday. That people felt that they could rampage through the city, they could throw bricks and missiles at police officers. That is not the Britain I know, and that has to be dealt with quickly.
And what I'm putting to you is that if a judge was to turn around and say to those looters, to say to those people, here you are, 10 years in prison, off you go, that's something you'd like? It's their decision, but that's something as a minister, as an MP, that you're keen on.
I want consequences for people's actions, yes. Now, obviously, we have a framework around what the consequences are for violent disorder, and as you say, they are very lengthy periods in prison if you commit that level of offence. Equally, rioting, very long sentences. So that is a matter for the courts to decide what the most appropriate sentence is. But clearly, I want them punished, yes, absolutely.
Are we at a stage where looking ahead, we may well see the army on our streets within the next few days if the government is unable to get a handle on this situation?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. We had the meeting on Thursday with the Prime Minister and the Chief Constables. It was quite clear then the police said they had what they needed to be able to deal with this level of public disorder. We were looking at what other measures could be used, for example, criminal behaviour orders, whether that more use could be made of those, travel bans. Many of the things that have been effectively with football hooligans, we think might be appropriate in this case as well. So I think there's a whole range of things that we can use. But the police were very clear they had the resources that they needed.
But those resources are finite, and we may end up in a situation, mightn't we, Minister, where actually those police officers going out in the streets day after day to try and quell these riots are just exhausted and they need some support. And I'm just trying to ascertain for our listeners, is there a possibility that the army is kept in reserve?
As I say, that's not what the police are asking for at the moment.
But if they were to ask for it, then you'd be there for them. They'd be there for them.
Well, I think at the moment the Prime Minister is very clear that the police have the resources they need. What we talked about on Thursday was better intelligence sharing, using, for example, facial recognition technology. So things that we could do within the existing resources that we already have available, bringing that together. And that was the message from the police, that they felt that at this time could deal with the problems we have in the country.
I get that, and I completely respect that answer, Minister. What I'm driving at is that actually these are exceptional circumstances, and these circumstances, this crisis could become even worse. And what I'm trying to ascertain for our listeners is actually, if we're looking ahead to the next week, the week after, and we continue to see this level of violence, and the police actually put their hands up and say we can't do this anymore at this level, the army is there to go out onto the streets and to take back control.
Well, can I just say to you that the whole purpose of the approach we're taking at the moment, which is to say to those people who engage in this criminal activity on our street that they will be held accountable, is to deter them and others from doing this anymore.
It's not working, is it? Because we had a situation where there was a meeting with the police chiefs. We then had the press conference, and since then we've had riots and disorder in 9 cities up and down the country. Respectfully, I completely see where you're coming from, but it's not working, is it?
Well, can I just say, this has all happened in the last few days. So we need to now take stock over the next day or so. We need to see what happens today. We will, of course, be meeting on Monday. We will need to see what the picture is, what the intelligence picture is. We need to look at the actual information available to make decisions about how we best then proceed. But at the moment, our focus is on dealing with these criminals, arresting them, getting them into court, into remand if necessary, but dealing with them first and foremost. People need to know there are consequences for their actions. They can't just go around looting and throwing missiles at police officers. That's not what the British people do. That's not us. And we need to stamp on that small minority who've engaged in that really dreadful violent disorder on our streets.
Just moving on very quickly, because I know you're pressed for time, Minister. There's a line in the Sunday Times this morning reporting that Tommy Robinson orchestrated the riots from 1,000 miles away while he is on holiday. Do we need social media blackouts to stop the spread of misinformation from the likes of Tommy Robinson and others?
Well, you've picked on there a very important issue about social media and about the role it's played in the last few days, in particular the disinformation and the misinformation that's been on the platforms. And I know Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State for Technology, is in full meetings with those social media companies to discuss what to do next, how we can deal with that. There have been, though, this week community notices on some of the posts to make it clear that that information is not correct, because we know that that has whipped up people's concerns on certain issues. And of course, what I would say is that, you know, we've been in government for 4 weeks. Peter Kyle is already dealing with the social media companies and talking to them about what else can be done. So that is underway. But of course, the intelligence picture. Yeah.
All I was going to say is this is a conversation. Actually, you know, shouldn't it be the case that the security services, or whether it's intelligence gathering services, should be able to leap in over the top and just say, right, we're just closing down this particular platform at this moment in time, because otherwise we're going to have more rioting and more civil disorder on our streets.
Well, I don't think anyone's suggested at the moment that what you're suggesting, a blackout.
It can be done. It was done. If I think back to the terrorism back in 2000 and going back into the early noughties, there were those when we had the July the 7th attacks. The security services were able to basically put in place blackouts to stop the spread of information in the immediate aftermath of those terrorist attacks. And I was just wondering whether this was something that the security services were now going to start to look at again.
Well, I haven't been in the conversations that the Secretary of State for Technology has had with those social media companies or in meetings in relation to the security services, but that certainly, I'm sure, will be discussed. I'm sure it will be.
That's important. Just Nigel Farage, I listened to you.
Well, all options. I mean, I think
all options.
We want to make sure that all options are looked at. I think that's probably
including
I'm not party to that.
Including that very.
Well, I don't know. I'm not in those meetings, but what I'm saying to you at the moment, the focus is about dealing with the here and now and the criminal disorder on our streets and stopping that, but also having those conversations with social media companies about the misinformation and the disinformation. That, of course, is important, and it's not just about this issue, is it? We as you've just highlighted, there are other issues that need to be addressed in terms of social media postings.
Yeah, just briefly, I listened to your interview on Times Radio with John Pienaar on Thursday, and you said that Nigel Farage needed to think very carefully about his social media posts. Do you think something can be done, or would you support something being done to stop Mr Farage using his platform as an MP to stir up this disorder?
Well, all I'd say is that MPs are in a position as community leaders, and we need to be very careful about the language we use and how we put our views across. That's all I'm going to say.
Do you think
Nigel
that
Farage is responsible for... He is responsible for what he says, and I think, you know, that's where the buck stops with him. All I'm saying is that we need to be, particularly after this week, as I started off by saying, it's been such a tough week. The country is reeling. We're shocked about what happened to those poor little girls in Southport. I just think we all need to just be very careful about what we say, and we need to have we need to just take a breath at this stage, I think.
Final question, Minister. We've seen some horrifying videos on social media of people of colour in cities up and down the country effectively being lynched by these far-right members. Do you have any advice to communities in these cities about staying indoors, about trying to stay safe, staying away from populated areas?
Well, I think the police's job is to police our streets and to keep communities safe, and they've been doing that this week, but obviously under enormous pressure from some of this public disorder. I want every British citizen to be able to walk down the street and feel safe, and at the moment I know feelings are that some communities don't feel that, and that is incredibly worrying, and that's why we have to act in the way we're doing at the moment, which is to take off the streets those criminals who've behaving in this awful way in the last few days. That has to be dealt with, and those consequences have to be seen, so that no one else thinks it's acceptable to behave in the way that a number of people have in the last few days.
And of course there's going to be a bit of a time lapse before that happens. What's your advice to those communities?
Community cohesion is... Well, community cohesion is really important, and the Deputy Prime Minister has been leading on this, working with local councils to make sure that all the security and the arrangements are in place for communities. So the additional money that's gone into protect places of worship, that's really important because we know there have been attacks on mosques in parts of the country. So yes, of course, we want to make sure that all communities feel safe and they have the resources that they need to be able to do that.
But in the meantime, would you advise that when there are pockets of disorder that those communities just stay at home and close their doors and put their blinds down?
I want everybody to feel safe on our streets. I mean, I'm the policing minister, and I think that, you know, the role that the police have in this country of policing our streets and having communities feeling safe and secure is really important. So that's what I want to see. I don't want people to feel they cannot go out. I mean, this all obviously links with other issues around violence against women and girls. We know at times there have been comments made that women and girls should stay at home because of threats of violence.
It's not something that I advocate.
I want to live in.
None of us want to live in that country, and it's not something that we would ever feel that we need to advocate. But clearly there are precautions that need to be taken in these immediate circumstances, no?
Well, I think people need to keep safe. Obviously, they need to keep safe. I think that's what my message is: keep safe. But obviously, the police are there doing their job day in, day out, policing communities. And I'm hoping that we can deal with this particular problem around the criminal violence that we've seen on our streets by, as I say, that focus on getting those people held to account and consequences for their actions.
Dame DianaJohnson, thank you very much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.